Welcome to AP Environmental Science. In this video, we are going to talk a little bit about ecological footprints and how they're calculated and what they really mean. Now, an ecological footprint is a measure of how many resources a person uses, and this is usually expressed as an area of land or the number of Earths it would take if everybody in the world had that same lifestyle as you. So there's two different kind of ways to represent this. So it's really looking at how much land would it require to maintain you given your lifestyle. So when we're looking at the number of hectares per person, that would be saying how much land does it take to provide all the food and all of the products that you use and all of the fossil fuels that you use. Or we could look at it as the number of Earths. Typically, I like to think of the number of Earths method because it's a little easier to conceptualize. Now, there are typically 5 variables that are used to calculate the ecological footprint. Some eco-footprint calculators might actually use 6 different variables, but most commonly we're looking at 5. So we'll talk about the 5 today. These include the carbon footprint, or how much energy you use, the built-up land, so where do you live, what type of settlement do you live in, also the timber and paper products that you use, so the wood for building things, paper for writing on, and all of the many wood products that there are out there. Additionally, what kind of foods and fibers do you get from croplands and pasture? So the fibers used for clothing, the food for consumption. And then finally, we are looking at seafood. So how do the resources from the ocean, how are those impacted from your lifestyle? Now, ecological footprints really are just comparing these resource demands and the waste that's produced per individual or within an entire society. Now, something that I think is interesting to think about is as countries go through demographic transition, they tend to start using more and more resources, so they start to have a larger ecological footprint. So if we look at our graph in the bottom left corner of the screen, you can see that the ecological or biocapacity is the green line that is slowly declining, whereas the ecological footprint of everybody on the Earth has been increasing and holding relatively steady for the last few decades. But right now we're in what's called an ecological deficit, meaning we are using more resources than are actually available that can be replenished. I also want to talk briefly about comparing carbon footprints. People who have different lifestyles tend to have different eco-footprints, and if you look just at the diet or the things you eat, that has a pretty big impact. So if you look at somebody that is a meat lover, they tend to have a much larger ecological footprint than somebody who considers themselves to be vegan. And part of that has to do with where their food comes from and how much land is dedicated towards that food. Now, there are ways to reduce your ecological footprint, and this is really just focusing on each of those 5 variables and how you can reduce them. So to reduce that carbon footprint, you can use less energy, you can walk places, use public transit. To reduce that built-up land, focus on that smart design, so building up instead of out. But also something that's a little bit more attainable on an individual level is thinking about living with roommates instead of living alone. That's going to add more people to that smaller space, so then you're using less resources to just share a roof. Another way you can reduce your eco-footprint to reduce the impact of forests is thinking about your paper products and the timber products within your daily life and trying to reduce those demands. You can reduce the impact on croplands and pastures by eating locally grown food and eating less meat. Now, pointing out here, I'm not saying do not eat any meat, I'm just saying eat less meat. So try to only have it in 1 or fewer meals per day. And then additionally, you can reduce your impact on the ocean and fisheries by buying ecologically friendly fish or ecologically sustainable caught fish. I also put on this slide a graph that kind of compares the impact of purchasing stuff in-store versus online shopping, and I think that's interesting to see that no matter which method you pick, you're still having a pretty large impact. However, if you can just consume fewer products, you're going to reduce your impact overall. Now, in summary here, your carbon footprint or your ecological footprint, that's the sum of all of the actions that you've taken throughout your life. And as a global society, we have a pretty large eco footprint. So watch out, Bigfoot, we're coming for you. So I hope that as you watch this video, you're able to learn something, and please send me your questions here at the end.